You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, hello, hello out there in podcast land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about horror movies and science fiction films and those key elements that lift them above the standard genre fare. I am here with my good friend David Horton. How are you doing, David?
I'm doing well. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great. It's been a little chilly, but other than that, things are going swell. How are things going with you this week?
Good. I'm still trying to get back to watching some genre stuff, and I have not, unfortunately, but I did mark something off my list that's been there forever. Like I said, I've got this list that keeps growing, mostly because you watch stuff and then you say, oh, you have to see it. So now I have to add it to my list. But one of them that was, it just struck me the other morning. I woke up very early and I didn't have to be anywhere for a while and was thinking, oh, should I look at the podcast? Should I do what should I do? And then I thought, oh, I'll just check this one out and just start it and see. But it is a movie that just came out in 20 and it's called Mank.
Yes.
And stars Gary Oldman as Herman Mankiewicz, who wrote the screenplay for Citizen Kane, one of my favorite movies. And it had been recommended by several people, but one of those was Joe, and Joe had recommended, he said, because I know how much you love Orson Welles, I know how much you love Citizen Kane, this is great, you'll love it, you'll love the guy who plays Welles, you got to watch it. It's an incredibly good soundtrack, for one thing, and the soundtrack was done by Trent Reznor. And it is phenomenal because it's all orchestral. It's all 1930s, 1940s. It's incredibly good music and good score and good melodies. And the screenplay is phenomenal. And it's written by Jack Fincher, a guy I looked up because I'd never heard of him before. Well, it's his first screenplay. Interesting.
He's not related to David.
He's related. He's the brother of David Fincher, who directed it. So, and it's direct. Oh, it's in black and white, and it's gorgeously lit, and it is so good. If anybody who likes that quote near the end of the golden era of Hollywood, and especially the whole tie-in with Hearst and what was happening with Hollywood at that time, as far as they were realizing they weren't just a magic movie factory or dream machine or whatever, they could be used politically. And how does that work? And Mankiewicz kind of saw that and said, I'm going to put that in my script.
Is this in the 50s or the 40s?
It's in the late 30s, early 40s.
Because I don't really think about the studio system ending until like the 50s.
Well, this was when the studios were really at their kind of peak, but they were all selling out to each other. Like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer wasn't owned by Mayer or Goldwyn at that time. They had already sold out, that sort of thing. And it was right before actually, no, I'm wrong. It was late 30s, early 40s. So right before.
Because you're just talking 10 years into talkies, really.
Yeah, and right before we got involved in the war. Mm-hmm. So, and it's Welles was 24. 24. He was 24 when he directed this movie. I cannot believe it. It was awesome. It was really good. But Oldman again astonishes me. He is one of those. To me, he's one of those Gene Hackmans. He's one of those really, really, or better yet, no, he's much more like De Niro used to be. He just can do anything. Mm-hmm. This is Commissioner Gordon. This is Dracula. This is the guy from, The Professional. And he's playing Herman Mankiewicz, this alcoholic, drunk, but extraordinarily verbose, incredible language to it all. Just, because that's the way they wrote back then.
And what is Herman's relation to Joseph?
Joseph Mankiewicz?
Yeah. There's
Joe
gotta
was
be
his brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Joseph Mankiewicz was huge. I mean, he did All About Eve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But they were essentially estranged. And you see that in the film, the way they do.
Joseph
The
was Joseph gay? He may have been. I can't remember.
I think so.
So maybe that's why they were estranged. I don't know. One of them, this is the Ryan Murphy in my head, which is a swirling bunch of nonsense in most cases. But he showed a dinner party in Hollywood in that Hollywood show he did for Netflix. And I want to say it was Mankiewicz that hosted it. And no, it was George Cukor. Never mind. And he definitely was gay. I don't know if Mankiewicz was or not. So I may be speaking out of turn.
Well, Joe Mankiewicz probably was. Herman was married to a woman, stayed faithful with her, but had what they called platonic affairs. He would be gone for weeks at a time and just, be hanging out with a young girl or whatever, but non-sexually. They were just
weird.
Yeah.
That's very platonic, very strange.
But he was very caring, very good. According to what I've read and researched, whatever, he may have been gay, and that was, what he was hiding, sort of thing.
Could have, yeah. But you never know.
He was so outspoken about everything else. I doubt if he would have hidden it, because he was very much in everybody's face about everything. And it's a great movie. It's called Mank. It is on Netflix. I highly recommend it.
Is it Netflix? I thought it was Amazon.
I think I watched it on Netflix.
Okay.
Might be Amazon.
I know that it's getting a lot of word of mouth, and I figured it might be in the Oscars.
It is streaming now. So yeah, it could be in the Oscars.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, what about you? You've done, I'm sure, genre stuff. You've watched some.
Well, I mean, I have been bouncing all over the place. No spider babies.
Okay, no spider babies.
I did a big check off my list as well on something I've been wanting to finish for a while, but I just waited until streaming was available, and I finished the new Planet of the Apes series.
Oh, okay. The third one? There's only 3 right now, right?
There's 3, and there's potentially another one in development. They are Rise, which we covered at the first of this season.
Yep.
And then I went on to watch Dawn and War.
War. Yep. And what do you think?
I love them. I think they are well deserving of being in the canon of that franchise. I think they're probably the best 3 movies since the original.
Agreed.
When you say I would. I can't think of anything better.
I think Andy Serkis is amazing. He is just amazing with that mocap and the way he does it. And I like the characters a lot. I remember when we talked about Rise and I was going, oh, wait till you see the sequels. And you see what they do with these original characters that he's got and how they change them. It was really great. Yeah.
Speaking of Andy Serkis, there he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just the plot is great. It's similar in what you suspect happened with the original film. The secondary characters are great, just like in the first movie with James Franco and John Lithgow. Woody Harrelson immediately comes to mind from War, because he was fantastic and usually is.
He's Colonel Kurtz, essentially. You know? Yeah.
Right. And then I can't remember who the secondary characters were in the middle one. I want to say one was like
it was the one who wanted to friend them, right? Wanted to work with them. Yeah.
Anyway, I can't say enough about them. They're fantastic movies. If you haven't had a chance to see them, and they've been out for, the first one's been out for almost a decade now. But the second 2 followed a few years apart after that. Highly, highly recommend them.
And I think the same writing team, it's a man and a woman. I think they've done all 3. I
think you're right. I didn't do as much research for this since it was just a topic, but yeah, I did read where they are developing another one. And well, I don't want to give any spoilers for anyone that hasn't seen War, but it would there would be some continuing characters. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And I like the exploration of war being not just a war, but still lingering between man and ape, but also between ape. I thought that was interesting to add that layer to it. You know, and
Yeah,
that's not spoiling anything. It's saying it's just it's hard to establish a civilization after an apocalypse. So,
right.
You know,
And another character that I love is I've always liked Steve Zahn. He's a great character actor. He's been around since the 90s, and he plays Bad Ape. And when I read it in IMDb, I thought, oh, he must be the new villain in this movie. And it's not that at all.
No.
He thinks his name is Bad Ape because they always say Bad Ape to him.
No.
And he's really kind of simple-minded and very, very relatable.
Yes.
He's just a
Yes.
great character. And I
Excellent.
read that the new movie may center more on him. So I thought that was kind of cool too.
Oh, that'd be interesting to see his transformation. What I like about it is it does what I think really good writing does now in sequels or in continuing arc stories, which is these characters actually evolve and develop. You know, the characters at the end of War are different than they were at the beginning of Rise. Or even at the end of Rise, they go through changes and they go through turmoils and struggles, just like people do. You know, it's not episodic; it's more arc storytelling, which works for me.
I also love how they don't speak like Caesar, but then all of a sudden, occasionally they will, and you're like, they're learning how to talk,
Right?
And you gradually accept it because it's so subtly introduced.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And the mocap is phenomenal. Some of the best I've ever seen. It's very realistic, and the way they are able to show those expressions with all that CGI layered on top of it is great.
I was thinking about what you had said with The Mandalorian while I was watching it. I was like, just think if they'd had that technology.
Oh, in the background.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll definitely be mentioning Mandalorian a little bit today because it's special effects oriented. So.
Oh, okay.
And
Well,
this is a special effects.
That is a brilliant segue for us to move on to our topic of the day, which is a little science fiction film.
Teeny. No,
Teeny
hardly
tiny.
a blip on the radar.
That also coincidentally came out the same year as Planet of the Apes. How's that for a segue?
Yes.
Would you like to take it from there, David?
Sure. Just for all of you science fiction fans out there that are listening or watching us on YouTube, today we're going to talk about Stanley Kubrick's incredible masterwork, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Came out in 1968. It was directed by Stanley Kubrick. It was written by Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, who was at that time a really popular science fiction author. It starred Keir Dullea, Gary Lockwood, William Sylvester, and a bunch of other people that you really don't even notice or care about because you're so consumed by what you're seeing visually. The story is kind of hard to tell, but because it's basically two stories, let's say. It's actually more, but we'll get into that. A brief synopsis is, at the dawn of time, we follow a group of apes who are in their...
Wait a minute. We already did that.
Yeah, right. Who are in their primate sort of development and dealing with the problems that they have as far as fending off their water hole from another ape tribe, as far as communicating, as far as just trying to find food and survive.
I would go as far as to say they're more like Neanderthals, wouldn't you? Because they're kind of in between ape and man.
Yes, yeah, they're in a stage of evolution there in the middle. Which, ding, 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 that is the first huge thematic of this movie, is evolution. But they discover a strange monolith one night, essentially this large black obelisk. It's a monolith, four-sided, sort of tall thing that when they touch it, they end up learning the ability to use weapons, and that helps them get more food, fend off the tribe, actually commit the first murders, and develop and evolve, essentially. We jump from there 3 million years into the future, and suddenly we are aboard a space station, and we are learning that there was a monolith on the moon that has been discovered, and a science team has been dispatched there. We follow one character as Haywood as he goes to explore this and find out what it is. When they finally unearth the monolith and touch it, it emits a radar signal, or a signal of some kind that goes to Jupiter. So now we jump to the third section of the movie, which is following the 2 astronauts aboard a vessel called Discovery as it travels to Jupiter in search of where this signal went to and what could be there. Their story is probably the bulk of the movie that people remember and talk about, because it also has to deal with technology, because they have a semi-sentient computer on board, which leads to some troubles with the astronauts and with the mission itself, leading to a fourth final section of the movie, which has the subtitle of Jupiter and Beyond, which gets very artistic and very open-ended and very left to the interpretation of a lot of viewers, but basically deals with a single astronaut who goes through another evolution in his life and ends up becoming what's called the Star Child at the very end of it, the last shot.
That's Paul Stanley.
Yes. Not really.
For all you Kiss fans out there. Remember them?
So naturally, you're going to hear a lot from me on this because I am a huge fan of this movie. But Tim, let's hear from you. What did you think of this movie?
Well, my first impression, or should I say my first viewing, I have trouble remembering, but I'm fairly certain that I saw it with you on videotape.
Probably.
I know I did not see it in the theater because I would have been too young. So I probably saw it in the 80s on videotape. I'm sure that we may have been drinking or participating in something that would have made me go either wow or snooze. But so I didn't really remember it. So when I watched it, I watched a remastered cut of it yesterday or the day before. And I like it a lot. It does leave a lot to interpretation. I can see why people don't like it. There are lots of things that I read about people walking out, demanding their money back, including celebrities at the premiere. And Dennis was in the room with me while I was watching it. And as soon as the signal started, I mean, the apes were bad enough, but as soon as the signal started, he was like, I'm out. And it was the noise that was bothering him, not the film so much. It was the noise. But anyway, my opinion, I mean, I like it. I definitely understand why it is held in such high regard as like a science fiction masterpiece. And it still is. And it's Kubrick. I mean, you've got that whole other genre into itself. You know, the director himself was his own genre, basically.
Well, he was the auteur. He was one of the major auteurs of cinema. I mean, you've basically got, Orson Welles, Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg, and I'm done. That's fine. I'll be happy with those 4. I could live with that.
What about John Carpenter?
Well, yeah, he's up there. Right.
George Romero, Tobe Hooper.
No, Tobe Hooper is why. Do not say Tobe Hooper.
No, I was kidding. That was
Kubrick.
a joke. But I mean, you have to say that Texas Chainsaw Massacre would definitely be up there in the higher echelon.
As a one-time movie, yeah.
Right.
But I mean, these are people with a whole host of films. I have to say, my first time was on television as well. But I was lucky later on to see it in a re-release in a theater. And it changes, it evolves you as a human when you watch 2001 on the big screen. It really does. It is a phenomenal masterwork of cinema storytelling, in my opinion. Yes, I agree with you. I could see why some people, especially now, would get bored with it, because it has an extremely steady pace all the way through and does not stop. I mean, when you tell somebody now, oh, by the way, let's start watching this movie, and there's no dialogue for the first 38 minutes, they're going to go, what?
Or the last 20 something.
Or the last 20. Yes,
right.
That's correct. But you don't need it for the story to work. That's why it, to me, is a great work of cinema masterstroke, because he tells the story that you can follow, at least up until Jupiter and Beyond. I think that is very artsy. And I don't think his, I don't think it's as straightforward storytelling as the rest of the movie goes. But you can follow the whole story of the apes, Moonwatcher, and what happens with his tribe and everything else. And follow what happens to them and learn what happens to them and kind of get emotional about it. You get pissed off when the other ape, the other tribe takes their water hole from them. Mm-hmm. And you get kind of creeped out and freaky, especially the way he does the music and the shots and everything when the monolith appears. And then suddenly you kind of go, oh my God, he just beat that ape to death, sort of thing.
Right.
You cannot watch this movie without. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I didn't realize that the book and the movie were kind of written and filmed at the same time.
Well, the movie is actually based on the short story called The Sentinel,
right?
That he had written before. He had written that years earlier, and they were adapting it. But yes, Arthur, part of the agreement was that Arthur could write the novel of the screenplay at the same time, which kind of helped, I think. It helped from a publicity standpoint, because, when the book is strong and the movie's right there on its tails, that works really well.
Right.
And
if you go on Wikipedia, you can read a little bit about it. And he went, since people did have a little bit of trouble understanding parts of it, he went into a little more depth in the novel explaining things.
Yes.
I read that as well.
Yes,
but I also read that if you understand this movie, then their goal has failed. So, I mean, it's almost like, okay, what is it then?
Well, he deliberately, both Clarke and Kubrick deliberately don't answer the burning questions.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, where did the monolith come from? What is it really doing? And what happens at the end? Is that really Bowman, or is it not Bowman? Is it? What is it? What is that? I don't understand. Why is there a baby? There's a baby floating in space. What does it mean?
Is it going to eat the planet? Because it looks about the same size.
Yes. And it is essentially, he came home and he's watching.
Well, I read that in the book, the cut from like the bone going up in the air, that satellite going around is a nuclear warhead.
It's a missile platform. Yeah.
And that the baby comes back and destroys nuclear weapons or something.
Well, yeah, he brings peace to man in the novel. Sort of thing. We don't see that in the movie at all. Because Kubrick does leave it open-ended. Again, he doesn't answer the questions. What really happened to Hal? He doesn't answer that question. What I love about that, well, let's talk about some overarching before we get into casting too. So the movie itself basically has three huge themes. One is the limits and consequences of technology, and this is all from researching this movie for years, because I love this movie, and people do teach college courses.
Well, and you're talking about like artificial intelligence and or weapons.
Yes.
Right.
Meaning, to your point, the primitive one, it's the bone. They actually use a bone and realize that a bone can be used as a weapon.
Multiple things.
they have one of the most memorable cuts in motion picture history when the ape tosses the bone in the air and it cuts, and it's 3 million years later, and it is a missile platform. We don't know it's a missile platform. We just go spaceship.
Yeah,
But that
it looks
cut
like a spaceship.
alone is pretty dramatic.
Mhm.
And so then in the second section, the limits and consequences of technology, all about how and computer sentience and all of that kind of stuff. And then the consequences of technology at the end of the Star Child actually evolving and coming back, which leads to the second thing, which is evolution, past, present, and future, which is essentially what is in all 4 segments of it. And then the very nature of existence. Why are we here? What are we supposed to do here? Who brought us here? And what affects us here? Kind of thing. So all of those themes are in all 4 sections of the story. They're just not in your face. Kubrick is an auteur of visuals, so you can't talk about this movie without visuals or talking about visuals. When we did The Shining, we talked about, how his single point focus for that movie and how it worked. He does that a lot in this movie as well. Actually, your background right now is an example of that, because you are forced to look at the center of the screen. There's nothing else. You have to look there. He makes incredibly brilliant choices all through this in what he shoots and how he shoots it. From the Dawn of Man sequence, which has so much of it is very, very long shots showing the whole tribe. And you might be focusing on one character in the middle of the frame doing his thing, but you're very far away from him. And even when you're close up, you feel like you're zoomed in because things pass in front of the lens, other apes or the tapir or dust or whatever. And you don't feel like you're right there in the face. You feel like you're zoomed in like binoculars. You're still far away watching them. Sort of thing. It's a very bird's eye view POV sort of storytelling for that whole first section. The second section has the most of any moving camera. You actually follow Floyd a lot and move with him, and the camera pans and moves a lot. That doesn't happen when we suddenly get into Bowman and Poole. Everything is a static shot. Everything's usually angled because of the way the ship was designed and everything else. So things aren't perfectly aligned, and you start to lose your orientation of what's where, which is what it would be like in space. And then he goes and reverts back to that distant visuals in the last section with Bowman when he's in the bedroom and the dining room and everything else. Everything is very static, very looking at something. And I saw one reviewer, and I agreed with him. He goes, and this is the most Kubrick designed bedroom in history.
Right. It's it's like, I don't know. It looks like something out of A Clockwork Orange.
Oh yeah. It is so Baroque yet so futuristic looking. I mean, a glowing floor with all that Baroque furniture and just monotone color. Everything is either one of 2 colors.
Right. There was first of all, I watched it on DVD, and I had no idea that there was like a 3-minute intro of music with nothing on it. Have you seen that? And I was like, is my DVD fucked up? What's going on? Why am I not seeing anything? So then I scanned ahead and saw the MGM logo, which is the only time I think they use that particular logo, except with the hotel or something. And then there's an intermission. And I thought, to me, that was a really strange place to put the intermission. It was
Where does he have it? I'm trying to remember.
It's right when they're whispering to each other and Hal's reading their lips.
Oh, yeah.
It just cuts. It's like really abrupt. And I was like, I don't know if I would have done that. But anyway.
I remember liking it because now you're thinking. It's kind of like, one of my gripes, and I've mentioned on the podcast before, is, with all these people binge watching, And then they come back and go, well, I didn't really like it, or I was really boring in this part, or I didn't like the middle 3 episodes. I was going, you watched them back to back. You didn't give it a week sometimes to think about it and what happened. And right there, your brain starts going crazy if you don't get that next chapter, that next fix, that next episode sort of thing. And I kind of like the fact that right there when you're going, wait, did the computer, Hal knows. What's going to happen now?
Yeah, the whole house sequence would be my favorite sequence. But that's because it's suspenseful. I have no problems at all with the ambiguity. You and I have talked about this before. I love calculated ambiguity. I don't like negligent ambiguity.
Okay, that's going to be a new phrase of mine. I love that. Negligent ambiguity.
Yeah, if it's there for a reason, I want to figure out, that big black thing made them evolve. They now realize they can use bones as weapons. That makes sense. I had no problem. And I can interpret that myself. I'm intelligent enough to figure that out. I guess some people might not be. I mean, I probably have a relative or two that could watch it and have no idea what was going on.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. Yes. Negligent ambiguity. I'm going to remember that one. That's a good one.
Well, thank you. I will trademark it.
Yes, you should immediately.
Just like Pan Am and Howard Johnson's.
Oh my gosh. So yes, there is product placement that was kind of, unique and then not sort of thing. So the fact that you have Hilton on the space station, I thought, that's pretty telling and pretty good. But you have Pan Am and Howard Johnson's as well. Oops, that didn't work too well for a future look or whatever. But
it still looks very futuristic, but obviously the costumes are somewhat 60s and the hairstyles. That to me was an odd little section of the film. I really like the apes. I really like the guys in space with Hal, but that little odd meeting with the people, you know what I'm talking about? I guess what's his name? Haywood, yeah.
But there's reasons for that. Yeah, and again, it goes back to another kind of what I think is like a fourth theme in this, which is conflict. And every story has to have conflict and you have to have it. In the first one, the conflict is between Moonwatcher and the other tribe. The other tribe is trying to take over the water hole. They're, bigger than his tribe, and, he ends up fighting back. The Hal conflict, of course, is between the astronauts, Bowman and Poole, and Hal, the computer. And the fact that they're adversarial. They may not even know it, but they're adversarial, and it ends up becoming adversarial. In the last one, the conflict is Bowman and himself, him realizing his own evolution and his own change and what's happening. So that was kind of part. But for the Floyd section, they had to have the conflict. It couldn't just be, hey, let's go to the moon and look at the thing. So the conflict is with the Russians. And the fact that the secondary thing is that their dialogue is so banal that it kind of undercuts everything else that's happening. It's like, I kind of got more information from watching the monkeys than I did from you guys sitting around talking, dude.
No,
and I think he meant that. He meant conversation has just totally gone away.
Well, and then the only thing that grabs your attention is when the guy mentions the problem and he just says, I'm not at liberty to discuss that.
Right.
And you're like, wait, what?
And all that Cold War political tension, all that was still there and still undercurrent of everything, really liked that. And I like Floyd's address. One of the keys for me I was going to mention was, when Floyd addresses all of them and they have the walls, and the walls are just like great big white blank things. It reminded me of Dr. Strangelove, which he had just shot before this, in the war room. You can't fight in the war room sort of thing. But yeah, using when Poole and Bowman talk about stuff, they don't really talk about really anything. Their conversation is very banal, very boring, very.
They don't seem like they're really good friends to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's and they're very cold in their attitudes to each other, and they're very
Right.
cold. I've read reviews and people say the most realistic and lifelike and compelling character in this movie is Hal.
Yes.
And I think that was intentional as well.
Okay.
I think part of it was this dialogue becoming so just boring and nonsense. You're like, I don't really care about these people at all, but the computer I care about. And I'm sad when he turns them off, sort of thing.
I'm sad.
Every section, I've got some trivia and some stuff I like about. Do you want to do casting or anything about casting?
I do want to do
before?
casting. I didn't know if you wanted to do scenes first. But I mean, you really could talk about any of the scenes, and we have talked about some because they're, expertly shot and created. It's just like visual art.
It is.
And there's
So
not
great.
a lot about the cast that I can tell you. I do have Keir in there. Specifically, I would be remiss if I weren't to mention, and I just watched this a few weeks ago, by the way. He is Peter in Black Christmas, the Bob Clarke 1974 slasher film that a lot of people argue predates Halloween. I mean, it does predate it, but a lot of people think that it was really the first to come before Halloween as far as that genre, so much the slasher genre. If it were me, I would go further back to Italy. But anyway, he is not, other than that little nod to my genre, I've not seen this guy in a lot. He was the last person to see Sal Mineo alive. I thought that was interesting. They were in a play together called P.S. Your Cat is Dead, rehearsing, and when Sal Mineo walked home, he got killed. He got murdered. Thought that was wild.
He did do a lot of theater. I knew that.
Mhm.
I know he went to the stage more so than being in films again. I think we mentioned him in an earlier podcast because he was actually in the one season only Harlan Ellison series that I'd never heard of until we did that research. Starstruck or something like that was the
I
name
seem
of
to
it.
remember that as well.
And he was the lead in that.
Okay. But as soon as I saw that he was in Black Christmas, I was like, I just watched that. And then I went back and went, oh, he had long hair. I didn't remember him because his hair, and there's a lot of people in Black Christmas. It's got Margot Kidder and Andrea Martin. I mean, people you recognize when you watch it. It's just really strange to go back and watch that film. And it is a lot better than I remembered it.
That's good.
We can move on to Gary Lockwood, who obviously played Dr. Frank Poole. And we know him recently because of our sister podcast. He played Lieutenant Gary Mitchell. Was it Lieutenant Gary Mitchell on the second Star Trek pilot, Where No Man Has Gone Before?
Yes. Great job, too. Really good.
Yeah. The first of many Star Trek godlike characters. The only thing I knew that I thought was interesting about him, none of these people obviously had alternates as far as casting because Kubrick knew what he wanted. But he started his career as a stand-in for Anthony Perkins. I thought that was interesting. And he has a daughter that's an actress too, and a wife. Samantha Lockwood is his daughter with Denise Dewberry. Denise was an actress in the 70s, but this Samantha Lockwood has been on shows like Hawaii Five-0 right now, that show that was just on. So, and they're all, both these actors are still alive too. I noticed that.
Yeah, they do. They have started doing a lot more conventions too. So they're out there in the fandom a lot more, which is great. Actually, I saw one that I wanted to watch and couldn't before we did this podcast, but it was at a con somewhere, and it's both of them plus Douglas Trumbull. all
Oh.
three talking about the movie, and that would have been worth admission price.
Right.
So that would have
And
been
Douglas
great.
Trumbull, for those of you out there that have forgotten, directed Silent Running and did
Mhm.
the effects for this film, as well
Yeah.
as many others.
It's just amazing,
mhm.
amazing. And we'll talk about those in a
Um,
second.
Dr. Haywood Floyd was played by William Sylvester. I recognized him, but when
Mhm.
I went to look at his resume, I didn't know much of it because he's British.
Mhm.
He did a lot of British television. And then the only other character I'm going to bring up, because there are a few other minors, but the other character that we would be remiss without talking about is Hal,
Yes.
and his voice. And he
Yes.
was done by Douglas Rain, who
Mhm.
was a Shakespearean Canadian actor.
Mhm.
Kubrick was going to use one of three more famous people for the voice. I don't know if you knew this, namely Martin Balsam. But he had also considered Jason Robards and Walter Pidgeon, but then decided that he liked the less emotional, I guess, voice that
Uh-huh.
Douglas Rain brought. Even though, I don't know what it's the cadence. It's not that it's less emotional, but it's, I don't know, less recognizable than Martin Balsam. I don't know. But something made him say, no, I need to go with somebody else that's better trained.
Good.
And
It's a great
yeah.
idea.
And
You
he was
know,
also voted number 13 on the American Film Institute's America's Greatest Villains. So that
would be
actor
interesting.
will always have that. And I can't remember if he's still alive or not, but he lives in Canada. He did. So
Well, and a lot of it has to do with, and I think it was probably coaching from Kubrick about how he wanted it to be. Because the other thing that's unique about this is Hal doesn't have a face. You know, he essentially has an image that we see of him, but he doesn't have um, a face. This, what my background is what you normally see of Hal.
right.
You know, and that's how we personify him. But he's has no eyes, no lips, no nose, no form of expression, whatever. So everything has to come vocally. And he's a computer in 1968 when we had not. This movie actually came out, I think, 3 weeks before we landed on the moon.
I was going to
So
say I thought it was a year before, but it's definitely before.
it's definitely before we
We
landed on the
landed
moon.
in 69. I don't know when
Yes.
this movie came out. It was 68 though.
Yes, you're right. You're right. But so a year before we even landed on the moon, when
Mhm.
anybody's idea of a computer was the size of a huge office building, sort of thing, and this one is sentient, essentially the way it's portrayed. But he portrays him with this, like you said, it's not an emotionless voice.
Mm-mm.
It's just a very unique way of doing it. But I think, again, it has to do with timing and coaching and everything else. Like I love the shot where, Bowman goes, open the pod bay doors, Hal, which you hear a lot in spoofs and in everything else. But then it cuts to just showing the pod bay for like 4 or 5 seconds before you hear him
Nothing.
go, I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave. And you just go, oh, it just sends chills. You're like, oh my God, what? Did you just
Yeah.
say no to me?
Yeah. I just
Really
saw
good.
visions of like Sandra Bullock. Let me in.
Well, and we'd be remiss in saying that they didn't really do a lot after this. They all three of those, as far as Keir Dullea, Gary Lockwood in one scene, and especially Douglas Rain, are all in 2010, which was the sequel that they did years later.
Was
Decades
Lockwood in it? I had read that only the other two were. I
later.
thought.
Lockwood is in a flashback scene, so I don't know if he
Okay.
got credited or whatever, but he is in
Gotcha.
one flashback.
And I
But
watched that movie with you too, but I don't remember it at all. Just
I
that
actually
Roy
like it.
Scheider's
I'm
in
one of the there are 2001 purists who hate 2010 because they say, you're spoon feeding the audience. You're telling them everything that Kubrick left intentionally ambiguous.
Right. Calculated.
But I really liked 2010 story and the way they did it, and the way they brought Hal back and what happened and everything is really good. And I think it kept the evolutionary thematic of the movie, so I liked it. There were a couple of others that I thought were interesting. Frank Miller is the mission control voice, and he went on to do a few other science fiction films, and people recognize his voice a lot. He did like Inner Space, and he did a bunch of television as well. Lockwood did a bunch of television. And then the other one I have, which is a key for me, which is the lunar shuttle pilot, who only has like, I think, 2 lines to Dr. Floyd, is Ed Bishop. And Ed Bishop, a few years later, would be the Commander Straker of UFO, which was the Gary Anderson UFO series on BBC.
I don't know that at all.
What? Oh, you need to I have the DVDs. You can borrow them.
Has it got monsters in it?
It has aliens in it. Basically aliens who are trying to infiltrate the earth, and this organization, ironically, this covert secret organization, ironically called Shadow, which stands for Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization, Shadow. And they are secret and nobody knows about them, and they're trying to prevent this alien invasion. It's really cool. So it might go along with your X-Files kind of feel. You might like it. Okay. But anyway, Straker was great. Ed Harris was great. Ed Bishop was that particular actor was great in it.
I was looking up Frank Miller because I'm confusing him with that guy that Joe Dante used to cast all the time. That other guy. You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah. I think his last name is Miller as well.
Yeah, I think so too. It's something close to that anyway. But
yeah.
I have some awards. Obviously, this movie won them, but I have a couple that are a little unique.
That'd be
One is this has happened to us 2 weeks. It's worth mentioning. This movie was selected by the Vatican in the art category of its list of 45 great films. And so was Nosferatu, the original. So I was like,
that works for me.
We don't see that often.
Right.
It's very strange. It was also included, of course, on the 1001 movies you must see before you die, which is the Jay Snyder book that we always seem to find ourselves quoting. For Academy Awards, it won special effects.
Right.
It was nominated for director, writing, screenplay, and art direction, but it did not win. However, if you go to the other continent, across the sea, in the BAFTA Awards, it did win art direction, cinematography, and soundtrack. It won more than what it won here, and nominated for film and director, not a winner there either. So those are the main awards I have for it.
That's interesting. I mean, it should have won everything, basically. I mean, it literally should have won everything. Screenplay, director, visual effects, of course, art direction.
I was baffled because I was like, didn't Planet of the Apes win makeup? And so I went and looked, and neither one of them did. I can't remember what did. Planet of the Apes got a special award for, I don't know, they just call it a special award.
Well, they didn't have makeup awards back then. There wasn't a makeup award until like the 90s.
Okay, well, maybe that was it then. I was like, how could Planet of the Apes? I was wondering, if Kubrick's apes would beat, Planet of the Apes.
Right.
But
which was Chambers against Freeburn. I think Stuart Freeburn did these apes.
I mean, fascinating that these movies both came out the same year to me. That's just huge. I mean, those are two Paramount, or whatever, two iconic films from that one year. You would lean more toward this one. I would lean more toward the other one, but for obvious reasons. So.
Well, like you mentioned the makeup. I mean, what was very unique about the design too was he actually built these components in the face. So using their own tongue, they could manipulate the jaws and raise the jaw. And
yeah, you could see their teeth and stuff. They could
So
bare
that
their
wasn't
teeth.
done with wires and puppeteers off camera. That was actually done by the actors themselves, who
It
were all
looked
mimes.
amazing.
Yep. Yep. Casting wise, that's pretty important too. I mean, the cast that actually played the apes at the beginning, because they were all classically trained mimes. He intentionally picked people who were extraordinarily thin so that they could wear the costumes and not look bulky and weird. During that sequence, they actually use a couple of live chimpanzee babies, to add some credibility to it, sort of thing.
I read that he wanted him to be more evolved with less hair, but he couldn't do it because of the nudity.
Right.
So he had to put hair on them to hide the nudity.
Yep. But special effects, so let's talk about that. We can spend a few minutes just talking about that. The special effects to this movie, in my opinion, it'd be interesting to see what you think, still hold up today, almost 50 years later, 50 years, yes. Over 50 years later, they still look incredible. And they were done without a computer. They were done without any form of superimposing. It was before green screen. It was before all of those effects. And they still work and look incredible.
Oh, no, I totally agree. The effect, I mean, some of the stuff he pioneered at the end, like this stuff, is a little dated to me. But if you're talking just about the spaceship stuff and the outer space stuff, yeah, it's phenomenal.
Well, I think slit scan, you saw too much of it on, what was that, the 70s and 80s, like the movie of
ABC.
the week or whatever.
Yeah, movie of the week. And they let him do that as well. He did that for them.
Yeah, Trumbull did that.
I read that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that was a unique effect that was pioneered, that had never been done before. The other one was, and this leads to a key, was motion capture. He needed, because they didn't have any kind of superimposing, he needed to be, I mean, any kind of, green screen or computer generated. He needed to be able to recreate the motions of the ship against whatever else he was filming it against. So they developed cameras with these motors and servos and everything else that he could program to recreate the shot over and over again. And allow multiple passes so that lights would show, or so that he could, then end up putting a little image behind the window, sort of thing, for the control room. And that was a huge key, because it was mastered and gotten better by George Lucas a few, years later, when he did Star Wars and perfected motion control. The thing that I used to always tell everybody that I loved, and I would get them, I would go, okay, you're going to watch 2001. I know you're going to be bored for the whole beginning because there's no dialogue and blah, 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 blah. But if you like movies, be mystified by this. That was filmed inside on a soundstage. All of it. There were a couple of shots that were, just vistas that he shot in Africa. But all of that was done inside and front projected onto a screen. And it's amazing when you look at it with that in mind and go, wait, this is inside? So yeah, the way they do so much of it inside was great. And a huge screen. And that kind of explains why a lot of it might have been the long shots that we talked about, because, he couldn't get too close because he's projecting the whole scene on the background.
Okay.
Yeah, all of it was front projected, not rear projected. And the same thing with the shots. Like, you notice when he does like the spaceships in space, and they'll stay in the same angle when they're going back, away from the camera. Mm-hmm. It's because that's just a picture of the model. And he's just literally moving the picture.
Yeah, I read that some of the vistas in the beginning were just still shots too. Yeah. In the African desert or whatever it is.
He had people go and just do, but like, when Moonwatcher does the whole discovery, and starts flipping the bones and and all of that kind of stuff. That's really the only shot. The second time they do that, when he actually does the throw and bashes everything, That shot is actually the only shot that's literally outside. And that's because you see the sky behind him. It's from the ground. He shoots up. But, you know, Mandalorian doesn't have to worry about that anymore because all of their walls, their ceiling, and their floor are all LEDs. So Mandalorian now uses a similar technology, but it's rear projection. So, but yeah, Kubrick should have won awards just for that alone, just for those, the opening special effects. But then the other thing was the other, you know, special effects. The other big one was he went to an aircraft company and had them build a centrifuge set that could spin, that he could also lock and start his camera whenever he wanted to. That's this one,
right?
Yes.
It's gotta be.
But it's also
so cool.
It's also the same set they used for when Dr. Floyd is flying to the moon and she walks upside down and walks into the other room.
Right.
It's the same centrifuge that they use for it.
And
but like
it
you
almost
see
looks like that old Fred Astaire trick, the dancing on the ceiling thing.
Right. That's what I was going to say was, and I meant to look up the movie to find out, but that's kind of what inspired it. But even that was inspired by Charlie Chaplin, who actually did it before Fred Astaire did.
Oh, wow.
You know, locking the camera down to the set, but if the set rotates, then your gravity perspective changes. But seeing how he did that and does some of these shots is amazing. You know, the introduction of the astronauts is basically, I think it's Lockwood running, and he's on the centrifuge set. And the camera is literally mounted here, but the whole set is moving around the camera. So as he's running, he's, you know, I read that they had to hit very, very specific remarks because if they didn't, they would literally slide down the set because it would keep rotating.
Well, and I started thinking about Jack Nicholson on The Shining, and I was wondering, did he do, you know, 40 something shots before he had the one he wanted? You know, was he running that that whole time, you know, about, you know, 40 something times until they got a great take?
Oh yeah. Yeah, he probably would just run him to death and just took sections that he wanted, you know, sort of thing.
Thanks, Stan.
But yeah, the centrifuge, the rear screen, the front screen projection, the slit scan effect, which you already mentioned, and then motion control. I think those are the four big effect sequences. You know, I remember when I first watched it freaking out going, how is he floating like that in space? How are they doing that? Especially when Bowman goes into Hal's brain, essentially. He goes into the main control area of Hal is starting to disconnect him. And that's because they actually put the camera on the ground, pointing up, built the set looking up this way, and lowered him down on a cable head first. So he looked like he was floating toward the camera, but he's actually hanging upside down and he looks weightless. I was going, oh my gosh, that works. So, when I finally found out how they did that, I was going, really? That was genius. Who thought of this?
I had a little bit of an issue with it. I read with the floating pen that they basically just adhered it with double-sided tape to a piece of glass.
Yeah.
But what I didn't understand was, why was the pen floating and yet somebody could walk into the room and not be floating?
Because remember, she's walking very slowly because she has Velcro on her feet. That's how she's walking. That's why she's walking so slow. Okay.
Because that kind of threw me. And then if we want to talk about shots, the one that I didn't remember that kind of blew me away, and of course this is the horror in me, is when Bowman and Poole are in the pods, and Bowman just looks up and you see Poole spinning outside of his pod, just going out in space.
Yeah.
That freaked me out. I had to go back and watch it twice. I was like, what happened?
And spinning and freaking out at the same time. He's like, really yeah.
And I read somewhere where Clarke explained in the book that the reason Bowman had control was that he was not letting Hal have control of his, what do you call that, pod.
His pod, yeah.
Whereas Poole always let Hal do stuff. He kind of like used him
Yes.
almost like a slave. But you really don't, you have to remember that. It's not really explained for you in the film that
No, that's
Hal,
not.
I guess, ejected him out of that pod.
Yeah.
Crazy stuff.
I
Gravity,
remember
all over again. I was like, oh my God, Sandra Bullock, go get her. She's going in outer space.
And I remember, finding out because I was raised on Star Trek and everything else, and I'm looking at this going, where are all the stars? Why don't you see stars? And da 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 da. And Kubrick talked to scientists who said, no, you probably wouldn't. In the vastness of space, you're not going to see a bunch of stars twinkling because there's no atmosphere for them to twinkle against. So you're not going to see stars. Because I always thought, was that a mistake? He couldn't do the stars. It was, but it wasn't. It was. It keeps it cold and dark and, very oppressive kind of feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah. There was one point where he was like, I can't remember when in the film it is, when he's in his suit just moving towards a ship. And I was like, how's he going to get there without like thrusters? What if he goes past it? I don't know.
But remember, this was a first too. Nobody had shown anything like that. Everybody had, it was Lost in Space and Star Trek. Everybody had artificial gravity and walked around because that was cheaper and easier to produce. You're not going to show anybody weightless.
It was an Earth-like planet.
Right. But they had to do it all practically because there were no computers to digitally enhance or CGI or add on or take care of erase the wires later that you're using, so he had to hide the wires with where the actor's body was, or he had to hide the dolly that the camera was in. Even in the shot you're in, that little line that's going up the very center was the pole that stuck up. That's the track where the camera stuck up on a pole so that the set could rotate and not show the camera and all the cables and the power and everything else.
Well, that is a good segue probably to keys, because you're talking about things that had never happened before and things that happened subsequently.
Yeah.
Do you have any keys that predate this film other than Fred Astaire and Charlie Chaplin and Dr. Strangelove?
Slit scan, the technology itself for slit scan was actually developed for Vertigo for Alfred Hitchcock. Except they did it as the spinning, not as the big waves going toward, but actually shooting into a two-faced mirror that then went into a small aperture, and behind it you've got something happening that then you slow down the film and create the effect. Well, it actually came from Vertigo. So that's a predate of that.
So Hitchcock, I guess you would say Hitchcock was more the influence.
Yeah. And the music, of course, I think the music, because all the music he picked, most of the music that you remember from this is classical music that you've known before, but once you watch it, now you can't forget that image tied to it. Like Blue Danube is a good example.
Right. The 2001 theme that you mainly think of, that was a classical piece before this movie, right?
Yep.
What is it called?
Also Sprach Zarathustra.
Yeah, I would have never known that. I mean, at one point, Dennis walked in. I guess it was toward the end when they were playing one of the waltzes. And he goes, I didn't know this was from that movie. I said, it's not. I said, it was before this movie.
Way before.
Yeah. I said, that's a waltz of some. So I said, I'm not sure whose, but it's a waltz.
Yeah. And I am such a geek. I had the album. I had the CD. I had the poster. So again, another movie I like. But yeah, I think those are all the predate keys. Kubrick, I think, was definitely influenced by having done such a farcical, crazy kind of film with Strangelove, he wanted to do something very imaginative, very unknown, and kind of horrific, which it really is. It's kind of, the situations are kind of scary when you imagine it.
Yeah. Do you hear a motor?
Do I hear a motor? No.
My little heater just kicked on, and I didn't know if I should turn it off or not.
No. You
Okay.
stay warm because you're in space. So you need that.
Well, I just don't want it to mess with our audio on this. So that's why I was asking.
I don't think so.
Okay. It's very low. Okay. Other keys that predate, or because I don't have any that predate. Most of mine come after.
No, other than, we already mentioned it was the Clarke short story prior. So that was definitely a key that influenced
Oh, and it was
this.
the Sentinel. I need to put that in our notes. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's called the Sentinel. I think almost all the keys will be after this because this movie was so influential.
Oh, you know what? I have one that's before this that you'll probably be like, why didn't I think of that? Homer, the Odyssey, which, is even in the title. It's called, A Space Odyssey. And usually that is the arc of a long story. And this obviously is much longer because of the 3 million year gap or what have you. But it does show the evolution of man throughout the ages. Very similar to
that's interesting. It also works. Yeah, it also works for 2010 because basically the Scheider character, whose name is Floyd, I think, in the movie, is trying to get to Jupiter and get back to his family, his wife, and everything else, which is very Odyssey, very Homer. That's what he was trying to do.
That's almost a literal interpretation of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that's what a lot of people complain about 2010. It's a very straightforward screenplay. So there's not a lot of ambiguity to it. So it does kind of hit things on the nose. And a lot of people don't like that with regards to the cinema arc.
Did Clarke write that as well beforehand?
He wrote the novel that it was based on, but they changed the novel a lot.
Okay.
For the movie. I'm trying to remember, somebody directed that, and he was actually pretty good. I actually liked
I remember you liking it because I remember. We knew each other when it came out.
Well, it's Roy Scheider and John Lithgow and everybody else. Helen Mirren is in it. She's really, really good. Oh, Peter Hyams. Peter Hyams directed that.
Okay.
So, and he was good. He did good science fiction at that time. Let's see, keys. So
I have that Marvel Comics in 77 did an adaptation of it with Jack Kirby doing the artwork. I don't recall it, but Jack Kirby is like one of their major hitters. So that would have been interesting to see.
Yeah. I think the technology developed in this movie, we said, was key for forever. And has been since, even in doing stuff. But one of the ones I have is the technique of camera and flip was later used in Poltergeist. That same kind of keep the set, as Jo Beth Williams goes up the wall. And
they do it in Nightmare on Elm Street too.
Nightmare on Elm Street, I had on that one. And also Inception. It's a big deal in the big fight in Inception. The big... when they start jumping on all the walls, when the whole thing's rotating and they go room to room to room upside down.
Right.
So, yeah.
One I have that's sort of thematic and there's probably others that I'm just not recalling right now, but the whole Hal, betrayal, for lack of better words, it reminds me of Alien and Ash.
Yeah, it's a good
big
one.
time, because
Don't
all of a
trust the
sudden you
computers.
realize there's a whole other mission. Oh, it's in Aliens too with that little Paul character. Paul, what's his name? Where there's a whole other mission you're unaware of that takes precedence over the one you think you're on. And so both of those movies, Aliens and Alien, have a very similar theme.
That's a great one. And we can also credit Clarke and Kubrick for the sentient computers are always bad sort of thing, you know?
Well, if you're going to go there, then that makes me think of that old Dean Koontz story that they made a movie out of about the computer in the house that ends up taking over. Oh my God, what was the name of that? You know what I'm talking about, don't
Wait,
you?
yeah, there was.
It was in the 70s.
Yes, and it was the evil house computer.
It was like, was it
that?
Julie Christie? I can't remember.
Somebody
I'll
like
figure it
that.
out. I'll let you do a key and I'll figure it out.
Okay. What was that? Oh, that was a good, because they've done one since then. I just saw a recent one a couple of years ago, and had a weird name. It was like Tech or TAS or something like that, and that was the acronym for the the smart house, which is what we're going towards now in the world.
I know,
and
we just
except it kept the girl prisoner, and everything. Well, I cannot remember it, but it was something like that.
We did an X-Files podcast not long ago where we talked about artificial intelligence gone wrong, and we didn't even bring up this movie, and it did it too. I can't remember what it was. Hang on, I'll figure it out. It's called Demon Seed.
That was it. Demon Seed. I remember that.
And I don't remember if it was Julia Christie or not. I can't remember.
Barbara Hershey. Somebody.
She was in The Entity. It was Julie Christie. I was right.
Oh, there you go.
And Fritz Weaver, who I love. He's great.
Yeah.
Demon Seed. Artificial intelligence gone awry. It's been around for a long time. Chariots of the gods, man. Chariots of the gods.
They practically own South America. This movie's been parodied. I think everything from Mad Magazine to Saturday Night Live to The Simpsons. Every animated thing has done a parody of this movie. So many lines from it became like almost comical lines. Open the pod bay doors, Hal, and I can't do that, Dave. Was the one that I know I used to use a lot. People would say, "No, do that." I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah. I'm looking for other theme ones. I would say 1984, the whole Big Brother is watching you thing is very similar to the way Hal operates. It's like he sees everything, and when they think he doesn't hear them, he's reading their lips. So that I got a Big Brother vibe there, which would be 1984.
I think that's probably the biggest villain moment in the movie to me. Is when, even without a word, we realize that what Hal is doing and go, oh my gosh, why didn't I think of that? Why didn't they think of that? Oh no, that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good one. I think, and I don't have a lot of examples of it because I think there's a lot, and I'm just not thinking of them. But that whole idea of a mechanical entity that's the evil villain. Not necessarily a robot, like Colossus, the Forbin Project, those where the computer as bad.
Well, I mean, a lot of what we remember is from television. There's a lot of that on Star Trek.
Oh yeah, Ultimate Computer, M5.
Right. And then I thought of that bad movie just now, Demon Seed, which was very similar as far as AI going bad or whatever. Another thematic one that I thought of is this movie you said came out a year before we landed on the moon. And a lot of people didn't believe we landed on the moon. They thought that it was actually shot by Stanley Kubrick, which inspired a movie called Capricorn 1.
Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, I think O.J. Simpson is in that movie. Maybe so James Brolin, maybe. I can't remember. I didn't look it up, but
that's a good example. That's a good one. Yeah. And I like your Ultimate Computer homage. I hadn't thought of that, but that's true. I'm wondering if that was the year later, 69. Yeah. So maybe they did kind of get inspired by 2001 to do Ultimate Computer on Star Trek.
Right. Damn,
Yeah.
I'm Good. It does have James Brolin and O.J. Simpson and Brenda Vaccaro, Sam Waterston, and Elliot Gould and Karen
Yep.
Black and Telly Savalas. Oh my God, Hal
All
Holbrook! It's got
all
a
faking
bunch
a
of
mission to
people in it.
Mars. Yep.
That makes me want to watch it again.
Yeah,
I'm
that
sure
would
it's
be good.
terrible.
Oh no, it's television. How back in the 70s? How could
I
it be
don't think it
bad?
was television, was it?
I'm pretty sure it was.
Oh no, I
Well,
don't
that's
think
where
so.
I saw it. So I don't think I saw it.
Yeah, it's where I saw it too because I didn't go
Yeah.
see it at the theater. Yeah. God, that's great.
Uh,
And then I have, of course, I mean, we could basically say every science fiction movie since, but specifically Gravity, you know,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I said, him spinning out in space just totally gave me that Gravity vibe. Star Wars, as far as effects.
Well, most movies for effects, even up to Expanse, you know, the newest one and everything
Mhm.
else that I love. But you also remind me of one that I hadn't thought of, which was Quest for Fire. The entire
Yes.
movie has no dialogue, and
And
it's
it's
all
cavemen or
cavemen or
Neanderthals.
Neanderthal, you know, evolving, and you know, how do we discover the missionary position and all that stuff. But you know,
Hubba hubba.
but it's you know, I think they were probably inspired by a section where you could tell an entire story without any dialogue at all, not even sign language or whatever.
Well, and I
So,
think Clan of the Cave Bear did the same, didn't it?
was it silent? It may have been. I don't know.
Close to it, I think. I mean, maybe some grunts and stuff.
Hmm. I think had this movie not been as artistic, quote, as it was at the end, I don't think you would have gotten funding for people like Ken Russell and other more visionary directors later on. I think they would have had to do all their stuff in France or do all their stuff in Europe somewhere. But Kubrick kind of showed them that, yeah, you can make an American movie that has artistic pretensions, so to speak. Kind of thing.
It's funny that you say that because when I was watching the end with all the crazy stuff like this, that's who I thought of was Ken Russell.
Altered States.
Yeah.
It reminded
for
me of
sure.
that. Yep. That was definitely, and I think that was one of the keys I had. I don't think you would be able to do it without them, you know, sort of thing. You know, Kubrick pushed the visual envelope in everything he did. That's why I've always said he's one of the best cinematic directors.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll have to do Clockwork Orange next because we're going to run out of genre pieces here. Yes.
Well, that would be one to do. Whew.
Yeah.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
Singing in the rain. I think that's all I've got, other than, you know, you can't go. This should be in the top 10 of the 1001 movies you have to see before you die. It is so cinematic and so unique in everything it does, I think.
Yeah, I read that it wasn't doing well at theaters, but as word got out, they had to increase the screens because stoners were going to see it and just tripping and tripping out, especially at the latter third of the movie.
Yeah. Well, and I used to tell people, I said, you could still have a good time watching 2001 if when the title card, because this film does in 2 sections have title cards. Like you said, it has an intermission too. But, you know, when it says Jupiter and beyond, you could just leave. You're done. You don't have to watch the last part where, you know, he's kind of essentially watching himself, sort of thing.
Get old.
You know, we didn't touch on the fact that other than the classical music, the incidental music in this is really, if you listen to it without it's kind of creepy. It's very electronic. It's very like The Shining.
It's a cold movie. That's where he got a reputation for being cold for a reason.
Well,
and
yeah.
I see it in this movie and I see it in The Shining. And I remember it in
Look
A
at
Clockwork Orange. I just haven't seen it in a long time.
Look at Barry Lyndon, which is all done in candlelight and oranges and all, you know, dawn and dusk and beautiful and all that, and still cold. It's still a cult.
Well, I've
He
never
is
seen it, but yeah, I believe you. So
Yeah. Eyes Wide Shut, Full Metal Jacket, all of his
I've seen Full
oeuvre
Metal Jacket,
is-
and that is a cold movie.
he's a cold director, so to speak. Yeah.
Hmm.
But we get emotionally invested in his characters because I think his coldness is this very voyeuristic sort
It
of
is.
look at things. He makes you look at stuff you don't want to see sometimes.
Well, and we had this conversation last week with Nosferatu. I mean, his visuals are still imprinted in your head, just like some of those visuals I mentioned from Nosferatu. He's iconic in visual imagery.
There is a great, I think I mentioned when we did The Shining, but there is a great documentary. You guys should look it up. And I'm sorry, I cannot, maybe we can put it in the notes if I can find it, but it's done by the guy who was essentially his archiver. And it's a documentary about him. And he's like this long-haired stoner type British guy who basically spent 30 years of his life with Stanley Kubrick. Oh. Documenting all of his files, documenting all of his takes, everything else. And his take on Kubrick and what he does is really interesting.
Okay. Because he's a stoner too. No.
but he talks about the fact that Stanley will spend, 6 weeks planning 3 shots because those are the shots he wants. And it whether it comes to him or he'll be stumped by a scene because he doesn't have the shot he wants, and he'll put the movie off for 3 or 4 years. That's what happened with AI. He put it off for so long because there were still certain images in it that he hadn't gotten in his head yet. He's the one that said, in The Shining, I'm going to put the camera underneath you, Jack, and you're going to lean your forehead against the door. And we remember that shot. We go, oh, absolutely. How better any other way of shooting that would not have been as creepy, would not have been as powerful, would not have been as memorable.
No, and when we did Dr. Sleep a few weeks back, we recognized those shots again because Mike Flanagan knew we would recognize those shots.
Yes.
Again. Yeah.
And has to pay homage to him because that's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's why he filmed that bathroom scene and then cut it, because it wasn't necessary, but he liked the visual of it.
I think Hitchcock was a great storyteller, more so than just a filmmaker. But he was a very straightforward storyteller in the way he shot stuff. And every now and then he would have a unique shot that would help solidify the scene. But Kubrick does in almost every scene,
the whole time. Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's probably my favorite visual director of all time, other than Spielberg. So,
well, I guess that's gonna do us for this iconic landmark in science fiction. We will probably do a landmark in horror next week, maybe.
We might. Yes.
We might.
And it'll be good.
It'll be awesome. I want to thank you for joining me. We both want to thank all of you for joining us on this little odyssey, if you will. And please let people know if you like our show. Please, if you're watching us on video, please subscribe on YouTube. You can also check out our sister podcast, available only on Patreon. We have a Star Trek podcast there, as well as an X-Files one that, if it hasn't started, will be starting soon. And I guess I will see you next week, David.
Yes. See you, Tim.
It's been a pleasure.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.